We come into this world alone, and we leave it alone. Everything in between is just an illusion. This is a quote that has greatly impacted George, the protagonist of the movie, and the way he sees life. He is a bright young man, whose intelligence gears towards the existence of life. He is considered different from his peers, but it doesn't bother him a bit. He is more concerned about the significance of mundane and trivial things he needs to do in his everyday life, if these things even add any weight to his essence. If everything between birth and the end is an illusion, then, is there any meaning to it? What do working, sweating, and struggling add to the illusion that is life? George has always asked this question ever since he found the quote. Perhaps, by the end of the movie, he'll find the answer that suits him. This quote has become George's life philosophy. Unfortunately, he has negatively interpreted this quote. Despite his intelligence, he allowed himself to slack off his schoolwork. He doesn't find them worthy to spend his time on. He always doodles in his class, ignoring the requirements the teachers set. When Mrs. Grimes, his trigonometry teacher, walks to him to collect his homework, he simply says he didn't do it. He's so concerned about his mortality that he finds everything meaningless, including the homework. His classmates laugh at him, but again, this doesn't bother him. Just to set things straight, George is completely aware of his lack of motivation to do his schoolwork. It's just that he's too firm and focused on his existential crisis. Mrs. Grimes is firm about his homework too, so she sends him to the principal's office. Bill welcomes George. Clearly, it's not his first time talking to the principal. George sits on a chair, nonchalant about his lack of motivation, and shows body language that exhibits disrespect for authority. Bill explains to him the consequences of his actions. George may not see it now, but if he doesn't graduate from high school, it will impact his college education and his life in general. The principal reiterates this is the first warning for George to do something about his lack of motivation. If they will meet in this office again, it will be because of his suspension. George gives a half-hearted promise to work on his assignments. After this meeting, George proceeds to the school's rooftop to ruminate about things. When he turns around, he sees a pretty girl a few feet away, puffing out smoke from her cigarette. He finds himself developing a mild interest in her. Then, Mrs. Doherty, the substitute teacher, enters the rooftop. Quickly, George brings out his cigarette and lighter, just as the girl throws out hers. As a result, Mrs. Doherty thinks it's George who is smoking. She reprimands the boy, not seeing the true culprit walking behind her. That night, his mother, Vivian, confronts him about the email she received from the school. As a typical worried parent, she asks if George needs help with his schoolwork. But all these badgering questions annoy George. He tells his mother that he's had a hard day at school. He's depressed, and he doesn't want to be bothered with. He's going to relax, then do his work. Even with his mother, George shows disrespect that teenagers tend to develop at their age. The next day in his art class, George is showing the same disinterest in his work. Mr. Harris, his art teacher, passionately convinces him to look deep inside to find the best subject for his art. He believes George has a talent that needs to be developed. Yet, the boy stubbornly refuses to cooperate. After school, he finds the girl, who was smoking on the rooftop the other day, waiting for him. Her name is Sally. As they walk home, she thanks him for saving her from suspension. Then she asks why he did so. George says he figures he can handle these people of authority better than she can, seeing that he's met most of them for the school year. Sally smiles and comments on how weird he is. As it happens, George has earned a bit of a reputation for his defiance to work on his assignments. Sally is aware of this, so she asks him about it. George answers that there is just so much to think about that homework looks like an afterthought. There are wars happening, famines affecting many people. It's just not worth it to spend time thinking about the value of X or angle A. Sally chuckles at this. She asks if he's diagnosed with any cognitive disabilities, to which he says none. He adds, however, that his parents have tried many things to know what is wrong with him, or to just improve his academic outputs, but nothing works. He compares himself to a non-stick frying pan, a slacker where nothing works. When asked if he has friends, he says he's a misanthrope, which is fine by him. He says he doesn't have a social life because there are much bigger problems to think about. Sally can't help but wonder at his point of view. She says she has her thoughts, too, but those are pretty run-of-the-mill things that teenagers encounter. As they continue to walk, George realizes it is his first time voicing out those thoughts to anyone his age. In addition, someone actually listened to him without judgment. They finally arrive in front of Sally's apartment, where they see an attractive woman lavishly saying goodbye to her lover. Her name is Charlotte, and she is Sally's mother. Charlotte invites George inside and offers him some drinks. George feels awkward with her straightforward flirting, which makes Sally's eyes roll. When they are alone, George learns a bit about Sally's past. Charlotte had her when she was 16 years old. Sally's father was a truck driver who left them when she was young. They used to live in Tennessee, but when Charlotte married a rich man from New York, they transferred there. Sally was only 8 years old when it happened. In the present, Charlotte divorced her husband and is now enjoying her single life. Sally says she has some homework to do, which is George's cue to go home. Before leaving, he looks at Sally. He really finds her pretty. He thanks her for the invite, the small talk, and for listening. When he comes home, he's surprised to find they have no electricity, yet Vivian and Jack, his stepfather, are enjoying a simple candlelit dinner. Vivian says she forgot to pay the bills, but she tries to convince him this is an opportunity to try something new. George ignores them and goes straight to his room. His intuition tells him something is not adding up. In his literature class, George continues to doodle, not paying attention to what is being discussed. Ms. Herman calls out his attention and asks him to answer her question. But George genuinely doesn't know, making his classmates laugh. Ms. Herman sighs and repeats her question. What makes the novel The Mayor of Casterbridge a part of the Romanticism movement? At first, George says he likes the novel. Ms. Herman rolls his eyes at this classic student response. But George adds that the reason why he likes it and why it's part of the Romantic movement is because of the perspective chosen by the author, Thomas Hardy. He says that the town description is seen from the point of view of a traveling bee. Hardy could have chosen a godlike POV, which is all-encompassing, yet he chose the insignificant insect to be the eyes of the novel. Everyone is wowed by his substantial answer, and Ms. Herman encourages him to make this his term paper. Clearly, George is intelligent in his own way, but he is battling with the lack of motivation due to his existential crisis. At lunch, Sally introduces George to her two friends, Will and Zoe. Both of them know him as a slacker. But when Will sees the doodles on his notebook, he asks him to draw a cover for the invitation cards he plans to make for his New Year Eve's party. Sally encourages him, so he agrees. George and Sally continue to develop their friendship. One day, he invites her to cut class. He also shares with her his 4 golden rules when cutting. First, it is fun. Second, it should be done as rarely as possible to preserve its specialness. Third, do something culturally rewarding with the time to earn the cut morally. And fourth, noodles. That is, cutting classes is better enjoyed with Chinese takeout. George decides that watching a movie is considered culturally rewarding. After that, they continue walking along the streets. That is when George spots his stepfather, Jack, walking across from them. He looks serious. The two decide to follow after him. Sally is betting he is there to meet a lover. But after they see Jack entering a diner, she takes back her assumptions. To George, this is quite suspicious. Why would Jack choose to work at a dingy dinner when he has his own office downtown? For now, he leaves this question unanswered. A few days later, the school is preparing for career day. It is when selected students become liaisons to alumni, who will be visiting the school to give lectures. The principal is already waiting for George, because he is supposed to be the liaison for one of the alumni, who is now a successful artist. At first, George thinks it's a joke, but Bill brings up Mrs. Doherty's report about seeing him smoking on the rooftop. If George won't do his task, then Bill is more than willing to give him suspension for smoking. Immediately, George takes on the task. Career day finally comes. George welcomes a man who looks a bit disheveled. His name is Dustin, and by his admission, he just got over his hangover from last night. Dustin is set to discuss his career in Mr. Harris' art class. He is not the typical artist who easily explains the depth of the artwork. In fact, he bluntly says he doesn't know what those paintings mean, and he is not sure if he is making any sense. Despite this, George finds him cool and authentic. When they are alone in the school's backyard, he tells the artist he admires him for being true instead of spouting words just to make himself look smarter. Dustin takes this compliment. He asks the boy if he paints. George says he does, but he doesn't know what to paint. Dustin comments that it's a good thing if he is confused about his art subjects, but he must exercise his skills if he needs to create something. He invites George to his studio in Brooklyn to help him get some inspiration. George takes this offer, so he invites Sally to accompany him as well. They proceed to Dustin's apartment, where the man welcomes them. George looks around the apartment while Sally talks to Dustin. Later, he looks at George's doodles and is amazed at how creative they are. George tends to dismiss them as immature art, but Dustin says they are a great starting point. He encourages him to continue his art until he evolves in his career. He reminds him that he needs to exercise his skills so he can create something he can be proud of. Then, he expresses his approval of George's choice in his relationship. He initially thinks the two are together, but George says they are only friends. He can see that Dustin likes Sally, but the artist promises not to act on his attraction to the girl. The holidays have arrived. George enjoys a simple meal with Vivian and Jack. After that, he goes to his bed, looking at art books and catalogs. Then he finds himself dreaming about becoming a successful artist. He also sees Sally there, congratulating him on his art show. However, when he looks around, he sees that the canvases have become blank. He realizes he can't have an art show if he doesn't have anything to exhibit. He suddenly wakes up from his dream. Then he hears Vivian and Jack arguing about something. He doesn't know what they're arguing about, but he hears his mother telling Jack that she doesn't want to lose this place. On New Year's Eve, George receives a text from Sally, inviting him to come over to Zoe's place. When he arrives there, he sees Sally wearing a sparkling dress. He finally admits to himself that he is attracted to Sally. He chooses to keep this revelation to himself for now. She leads him to the basement, where Zoe and her guests are lounging. Even there, his eccentric fashion is a standout from the others' more stylish clothes. He meets Nick, who seems to have a history with Sally. Will enters the room, and he asks George to look at the invitation. It looks professionally done. When he turns it over, he sees the doodle he made for him. George feels proud of his output. In a sense, he has made something that has meaning in his life. Then, Will announces at large that they should all go to the club. It is George's first time to go there. Instantly, he finds it too loud and crowded for his taste. When Sally starts dancing with Nick, he decides to leave her there and go to Zoe and her friends by the bar. They tease him about having feelings for Sally, which he denies. And, for the first time in his life, he takes his first shot. A few minutes later, he goes out of the bar, crosses the street, and proceeds to throw up on the sidewalk. His world turns around as he hears the people's countdown to the new year. He lays there for a few more minutes. And that's how Sally finds him. She pities him, realizing she shouldn't have left him wandering the club on his own. She manages to bring him to her house. She pulls out the extra space from under her bed so he can lie down and sleep. George's consciousness is drifting between sleep and wakefulness. Before he gives in, he sees Sally changing into her pajamas. In the middle of the night, George wakes up. He looks to his left and sees his friend peacefully sleeping. He smiles and thinks how beautiful she is. Despite his inexperience in clubbing and his awkward socializing skills, he feels lucky to have spent the night beside the girl who has totally stirred something in him. He sleeps again. When he wakes up, it is already morning. Sally is smiling mischievously at him. He wonders why, and when he looks down, he realizes she is amused by his morning wood. Well, the amusement is not mutual. George decides to walk home after leaving Sally's house. Across the street, he finds Jack in his usual coat and bag. He sees him sit by the bus stop, but he doesn't get on when one comes. He wonders why Jack isn't going to his office. George wants to know the truth, so he proceeds to Jack's office. Upon arriving there, he sees the notice of eviction pinned on the door. It dawns on him that Jack's business has closed down. For how long, he has no idea. But this explains why they have not been able to pay their bills on time. Perhaps his mother knows about this, and she just won't let it affect their daily routine. George decides to follow his mother's lead. George continues to be under Dustin's tutelage. He accompanies the artist to an art show, where they discuss their interpretations of the paintings exhibited. For the most part, George is not getting any depth or meaning from the paintings, while Dustin comments that some pieces look expensive enough to be displayed in a living room. While they are walking around, Dustin asks George if he has made a move on Sally. George says she's not showing any interest, so he thinks it's a waste of time to pursue her. Dustin laughs at this and tells him women like to be desired. He should let her know he likes her, or else the chance won't come again. As they walk by, they happen upon a painting that shows repeated rows of desserts. George takes a liking to it, which Dustin notices. The latter expresses his interpretation of the painting, fetishizing objects. He says it suits George very much. George is taken aback, thinking about whether Dustin's comment is true or not. Around Valentine's Day, Sally invites George to a cozy cafe. Before that, she had a conversation with her mother about George. Charlotte can see that the boy has feelings for her daughter and is feeling differently about their relationship. But Sally insists that they are only friends and nothing more. On this date, she wants to prove to herself that she can joke around with George because they are both comfortable with each other as friends. They talk about their respective fathers. Sally recalls how she used to go on a fun date with her father before he left them. She has fond memories of them together. Meanwhile, George reveals that his father is in a different country and is sending tuition for his education. Every time he was with his father was the happiest in his life. He also reveals that he knew then that he was about to change, from a boy who has happy dreams and is carefree, to a young man who thinks deeply and is affected by the sadness of life. As Sally listens to him, she realizes he can put into words some of the things she's been feeling herself. She feels comfortable with him despite his quirkiness. An idea comes to her mind. She coyly asks him about what he thinks of her. George, not understanding her innuendos, tells her to be straight to the point. So, she directly asks him if he wants to have sex with him. For a full minute, he's surprised at this abrupt question. His eyes are showing his answer. Just then, Sally takes it back and says it's just a joke. She adds that he's the only real friend she has, so she wouldn't want this relationship ruined. George becomes lost and unresponsive for the rest of the night. Just before they get to her house, he tells her he must go home, that this is all a joke. Then he leaves her. Frustrated, Sally shouts that he thinks too much. George spends the night thinking about what happened. He keeps repeating a song about a man who's asking a traveling lady to stay with him a while, even though he knows he's just a station on her trip. Very fitting for what he's going through at the moment. Sally keeps calling his phone, but he doesn't want to answer. Because of what happened, his detached attitude seems to worsen. He won't speak to his parents, rudely telling them to leave him alone. He stops hanging out with Will and Zoe, making them worried about what is happening between him and Sally. Soon, Sally asks Dustin to come over and discuss what they can do about George. Apparently, he stopped answering calls from Dustin as well. Sally knows exactly the reason why, but she won't admit it even to herself. When she asks Dustin if she and George look like they're in a romantic relationship, the artist only smiles. She gets the idea that George has always considered her as more than just a friend, and it shows through his actions and his looks towards her, even if hers are not the same. Sally still insists they're only friends, to which Dustin reiterates they should be more than that. She doesn't want to have this conversation, so she changes the topic and asks him to dance. Dustin goes along with her, not knowing what to do. Deep inside him, he knows he's still attracted to Sally. She's 18, so there should be no problem if he decides to pursue a relationship with her. But he respects George's feelings, and he considers it indecent to come after her. Meanwhile, George's schoolwork suffers even further because of his romantic stupor. The last straw is the term paper that he never even gets to start. And it's almost the finals week. He gets sent to the principal's office again. This time, George doesn't show a haughty attitude. In front of him are Bill, Mrs. Grimes, Ms. Herman, and Mr. Harris, the teachers of the subjects he has been neglecting for the whole school year. Bill offers him two options to resolve this matter. The first one is the straightforward route: expulsion, right there and then. The second is the more taxing option. He must do what is essentially a year's worth of missed homework. He will be given only 3 weeks to do it. If he misses one, then he will not graduate. For the first time, George is realizing the gravity of his situation. He's been so focused on his daydreaming about his existence, about the grand scheme of things, that he has forgotten to live every day of his life, even if each day involves menial tasks such as doing his homework. His pain of existing in this illusion called life is now worsened by the fact that his future becomes unknown because he chose not to take action in the present. Ms. Herman says she's done defending him, even if she used to believe in his potential. Mrs. Grimes adds that this is the way they live their lives, yet he doesn't care about how he affects them. Why would they keep letting him do whatever he wants? George agrees with her and says that perhaps expulsion is the better choice. Bill tells him they will wait for his decision on Monday. When he comes home, Vivian and Jack already know what has happened. Vivian wants him to work on his missed assignments, but George refuses to do it. He doesn't see any sense in it, and he has no motivation to do so. Vivian gets mad and says she's tired of his lies. George feels indignant, and the conversation turns to Jack and his secret. He confronts his stepfather about not having worked for a long time now and hiding it from them. The conversation turns to a physical altercation, where George accidentally breaks Jack's collarbone. Unsure of what to do, George runs away to Sally's house. But there, he discovers something more painful. Sally and Dustin are already dating. As he walks away, Dustin catches up with him, just to make sure he's okay. But he's not. He accuses Dustin of betraying his trust when the latter said he wouldn't pursue Sally. In his defense, Dustin says he tried not to. But he also has feelings, and he's old enough to know that when he feels something, he must take action on it. This stuns George, as he understands that in a way, it's his fault for not telling Sally how he really feels. Over the weekend, George contemplates his life. He ruminates about the best thing to do in his situation. On Sunday afternoon, he meets his mother at the park. There, Vivian tells the truth. She's known all along about Jack's business going bankrupt. In fact, it happened a year ago. They have been in financial straits for that long, but Vivian has chosen not to tell George because she knows he's already under enough pressure. But things always come to a worse point. Vivian and Jack are about to be divorced, and she has to sell the apartment to pay their debts. She breaks down and cries, and George comforts his mother. George is aware that he's been disrespectful and obnoxious to his mother, but he never realizes how selfish he is. It's time to take some actions and live in the present. On Monday, he proceeds to the principal's office to tell Bill that he'll work on his homework. The principal accepts this decision, and he directs him to get his workload from his teachers. George first comes to Mr. Harris, who tells him he only needs to submit one painting. But that painting should be something that comes from his heart, something that has always held deep meaning for him. Other than that, he can't accept rubbish output. George understands the assignment and starts working on it. For 3 weeks, George laboriously puts his time and effort into doing his schoolwork. As established earlier, he's a bright student. It doesn't take him much time to answer each question and write the required essays. He even manages to attend school and take his exams. All the while, he starts on his painting for Mr. Harris. Before, he used to say that he didn't know what to paint. But his recent experiences have helped him zero in on the most meaningful subject in his life. Without those, he wouldn't find it in himself to face the challenge and bring out his true feelings on a canvas. Fortunately, he finishes all his work and submits them. When he gives his painting to Mr. Harris, the teacher approves his homework. Now, George only has to wait for the final verdict, whether he'll graduate or not. Right before the end of the school year, Sally finally manages to talk to him. She invites him to a diner. There, she reveals that Charlotte will be moving to Texas to marry her new boyfriend, while she will go with Dustin to Europe. She doesn't want to live with her mom, and she doesn't know what to do after her vacation. George thinks it's time to tell her how he feels. He says he loves her. He says he used to be an empty person, full of questions and uncertainties. But it all changed when he met her, and he's grateful for it. Sally appreciates this honesty from him. Together, the two of them spend the night at Sally's house. George keeps trying to change her mind about going away, but she says nothing can be done about it. The next day, George attends graduation, while Sally comes with Dustin to the airport. Fortunately, George passes all his requirements, and he gets his high school diploma. He decides to visit the art room to look at his masterpiece for the last time. It's the portrait of Sally, the person who made him realize that it's little things in the present that make his life worthwhile. To his surprise, Sally also comes there. As it turns out, she has had a change of heart and has decided not to go to Europe. She is still unsure of her future, but perhaps it's best to start with accepting George in her life. The two hold hands and look at the portrait, as if they are looking at their life together.